Aaron stood alone at the edge of the armory as dawn light slipped through the tall stone windows and rested on rows of silent armor, each set shaped by years of duty and forgotten battles. He moved with care, lifting the chest plate and fitting it against his body as if greeting an old companion, feeling the cool metal press against scars earned far from this palace. Outside the hall, the city was waking, unaware that something older than routine had returned to its walls. Aaron's breathing stayed slow and steady, shaped by long training and longer exile. He did not look toward the throne room, yet he felt eyes upon him, drawn by a presence that refused to stay hidden. The armor was more than protection, it was memory given form, and it answered him as if it had been waiting. Each piece slid into place with practiced motion, not rushed, not hesitant, as though time itself had paused to watch. The leather straps tightened across his shoulders, holding the weight evenly, reminding him of vows spoken under open skies and never broken. He remembered the night he had left this land with nothing but a blade and belief, guided by purpose instead of permission. The armory walls held echoes of soldiers who had served crowns and died unnamed, yet Aaron had never belonged to banners alone. His path had always bent toward balance, toward standing where others fell away. As he secured the arm guards, a faint symbol along the metal caught the light, revealing marks forbidden by royal record. That symbol carried history that rulers preferred buried, but steel did not forget. Beyond the archway, the queen entered the hall in silence, her steps measured, her presence commanding without demand. She had come to witness another soldier armed for duty, expecting routine and ceremony, yet something halted her breath mid-step. Her gaze fixed on Aaron's back, on the spine of the armor where the ancient crest revealed itself without shame. She felt a chill pass through her, not of fear, but recognition sharpened by disbelief. Stories told in whispers during her youth stirred awake, warnings wrapped in legend and denied by law. The shield bearers were gone, erased after a war that nearly shattered the realm. Yet the stance before her, steady and unyielding, belonged to one who had carried that oath. The court attendants sensed the shift and fell quiet, unsure why the air felt heavier, why the torches seemed to burn lower. Aaron finished fastening the final clasp, unaware of the storm gathering behind him, or perhaps fully aware and choosing patience. The armor settled with a low sound that echoed farther than the stone walls allowed. The queen's hand tightened around the rail beside her, grounding herself as memory and present collided. She had ruled through strategy and compromise, yet this moment asked for something deeper. A figure once cast into shadow now stood in full light, wearing truth openly. The balance of power trembled, not from threat, but from return. Aaron turned at last, slow and deliberate, his movement guided by respect rather than fear. He faced the queen without lowering his head, yet his posture held no challenge, only acknowledgement. His face carried the marks of years lived beyond comfort, lines shaped by loss and resolve instead of age. The queen searched his expression for defiance and found none, only calm purpose. Whispers began at the edges of the hall, quickly silenced by a single lift of her hand. In that silence, Aaron felt the weight of every step that had brought him back. He had not returned for honor or reward, but because the world had tilted too far, and someone had to stand where it could not. The queen descended from the dais, each step measured as she closed the distance between crown and armor. Guards remained still, trained instincts held back by an authority that did not need words. Aaron did not move, though the armor urged readiness, as if sensing that judgment stood before them both. When the queen stopped, close enough to see the fine etching along the metal, her voice came softer than the court expected. She spoke his name as if testing its weight, confirming that the past had indeed taken form. Aaron answered with a nod, not as a subject, but as one sworn to something older than rule. The hall listened, caught between history denied and truth revealed. She asked where he had been, and Aaron answered without bitterness, speaking of borders crossed, of lives protected without recognition. His words were simple, carrying no demand, yet each one struck deeper than accusation. He spoke of balance, of standing between force and mercy, of why the shield bearers had existed before fear led to their fall. The queen listened, her expression shifting from shock to understanding, then to resolve. She saw now that erasing the order had not erased the need. Aaron was not an echo of rebellion, but a response to imbalance. The court felt it too, though none dared speak it aloud. The armor seemed to gleam brighter as the queen reached out, stopping just short of touching the crest. Her hand trembled slightly, a rare sign of uncertainty that no one present had ever witnessed. She remembered the stories told by her predecessor, warnings framed as protection of the throne. Yet standing before her was not a conqueror, but a guardian shaped by sacrifice. Aaron did not claim authority, yet authority gathered around him naturally, drawn by purpose. The queen straightened, shoulders set, as choice replaced hesitation. This was not a threat to her reign, but a chance to correct a wound left too long unattended. She turned to the court and spoke clearly, her voice carrying strength renewed by truth. She declared that the past would no longer be denied, that balance would be restored not through force, but through acknowledgement. Aaron remained silent as her words reshaped the room, aware that this moment was not his alone. The armor no longer felt like a burden, but like alignment, as if he stood exactly where he was meant to. Eyes followed him with curiosity instead of fear. The guards relaxed slightly, sensing that danger had not entered, but protection. Outside, the city continued its mourning, unaware that its future had shifted. When the queen dismissed the court, only Aaron remained, standing beneath the high ceiling where banners stirred gently. She faced him once more, no longer as ruler to subject, but as one guardian to another. She spoke of the threats gathering beyond the borders, of unrest born from imbalance left unchecked. Aaron listened, understanding the weight she carried, knowing that crowns were not shields against destiny. He agreed to stand where needed, not above the throne, not beneath it, but beside it. The pact was unspoken, yet sealed through mutual understanding rather than decree. As Aaron left the armory, sunlight struck the armor fully, illuminating the crest without shame or secrecy. Servants paused, sensing importance without knowing its name. The city gates stood open ahead, the world beyond waiting as it always had. Aaron did not look back at the palace, yet he felt the queen's gaze follow him, not with fear, but trust cautiously given. The first step of return had been taken, and the path ahead would demand more than strength. Balance rarely came without cost, but Aaron had already paid much. With armor secured and purpose renewed, he moved forward, carrying the weight of history toward a future that could no longer hide. Mourning spread across the city with quiet purpose as Aaron walked beyond the inner gates, his armor catching light and attention without seeking it. People paused in their routines, sensing meaning rather than spectacle, and stepped aside with instinctive respect. He moved through narrow streets and open squares, hearing life continue around him while something deeper shifted beneath it. The queen's words echoed in his thoughts, not as command but as shared burden. Balance was never restored in halls alone, it had to be lived among the people. Aaron welcomed the weight of that truth, knowing this path demanded presence, not distance. At the far edge of the city, where stone gave way to earth, Aaron stopped near the old watch post long abandoned by royal guard. The structure leaned with age, yet its foundation remained firm, much like the order once sworn to protect this land. He rested a hand against the weathered stone, grounding himself in memory and purpose. This place had once been a meeting point between crown and frontier, now forgotten by both. Aaron chose it as his first stand, not for strategy alone, but for symbolism. Balance began where neglect had taken root. By midday, word had spread quietly that a shield-bearer walked the streets once more. Not through announcement, but through observation and whispered certainty. Farmers paused at the market, traders leaned closer in conversation, and elders felt stories stir that they had never been allowed to tell. Aaron spoke with few words, listening far more than he answered. He heard of disputes left unresolved, of borders tested by pressure rather than force, of fear growing in spaces left unattended. Each concern settled within him like a marker on an unseen map. This was the terrain balance required him to walk. When the queen summoned him again, it was not to the throne room, but to a council chamber opened only in times of uncertainty. Aaron entered to find her seated alone, maps spread across the table, each marked with signs of strain. She looked up with relief she did not hide, setting aside formality in favor of clarity. Together they stood over the maps, not as ruler and subject, but as stewards of stability. Aaron pointed not at borders, but at patterns, showing where imbalance began before it ever became threat. The Queen listened, recognizing wisdom shaped by distance and return. They spoke of the shield-bearer's fall, not assigning blame, but tracing fear to its source. Long ago, the crown had mistaken independence for defiance, balance for challenge. Aaron explained that the order existed to prevent extremes, not to claim authority. When trust broke, the order was scattered, leaving a void slowly filled by unrest. The Queen acknowledged this without defense, her voice steady with acceptance. She did not seek to restore the past, but to learn from it. Aaron respected that choice, knowing restoration required evolution, not repetition. That evening, the Queen announced a new mandate, careful in wording and intent. Aaron would not command armies nor judge courts, but observe and intervene where imbalance threatened harmony. His presence would be quiet, his authority rooted in trust rather than decree. Some advisors resisted, fearing loss of control, but the Queen stood firm. She understood now that strength did not weaken when shared wisely. Aaron accepted the role without ceremony, aware that the work ahead would be unseen by most. Balance rarely drew praise, yet its absence always drew consequence. Days passed as Aaron traveled beyond the city, moving through villages and border paths long overlooked. He wore his armor openly, not as warning, but as assurance. People spoke freely in his presence, sensing no hidden agenda, only attention. He resolved disputes through listening rather than force, guiding conversations toward fairness and restraint. In places where tension had lingered for years, calm returned slowly, like water finding level ground. Aaron left no marks of conquest, only traces of understanding. The land responded with quiet relief. In the hills to the east, Aaron encountered remnants of an old garrison abandoned after the order's fall. Broken towers stood against the sky, their purpose forgotten by all but stone. He walked among them, recalling training shared beneath those walls, voices long silent yet not lost. The shield-bearers had once gathered here to share knowledge, not strategy, believing wisdom stronger when shared. Aaron decided the place would stand again, not as fortress, but as meeting ground. Balance required space for voices to meet without fear. When the Queen visited the site weeks later, she did so without escort or display. She walked beside Aaron through the ruins, listening as he explained his vision. This place would belong to no single banner, welcoming envoys, elders, and guardians alike. The Queen agreed, seeing how such a space could ease tension before it hardened. Her trust deepened, not blind, but informed by results already seen. The land itself seemed to approve, wind moving gently through broken stone. Something once lost was taking form again, reshaped by humility. News of restored calm reached distant regions, carried by travelers rather than messengers. Where fear had once fueled rumor, hope now traveled quietly, unchallenged. Aaron remained vigilant, knowing balance was never permanent, only maintained. He trained those willing to learn not combat, but awareness, teaching them to recognize imbalance before it grew. These lessons spread without title or hierarchy, strengthening the land from within. The Queen supported this approach, resisting pressure to formalize what thrived in freedom. Together, they guarded not just borders, but understanding. One evening, as sun dipped low, Aaron stood alone overlooking the valley below the restored ruins. Lights from scattered homes flickered gently, unafraid of night. He reflected on the journey that had brought him back, on the cost paid by many unseen. The armor felt lighter now, shaped not by burden, but alignment. He knew challenges would return, perhaps stronger, perhaps disguised. Yet he also knew balance had allies now, not bound by oath alone, but by shared purpose. The future felt uncertain, but no longer fragile. The Queen joined him in silence, standing not as ruler, but as witness to change. She spoke of her own learning, of how fear once guided her decisions without her knowing. Aaron listened, understanding that leadership often required unlearning as much as command. They did not speak of reward or legacy, but of responsibility carried forward. As night settled, the valley remained calm, protected not by walls, but by awareness restored. Balance had not been declared, it had been practiced. And through that practice, the realm began to heal. Weeks passed as calm settled across much of the land, yet Aaron knew balance was never a state that lasted without effort. He traveled steadily, moving between valleys, rivers, and border paths where quiet tension still rested beneath daily life. People greeted him not with fear, but with trust built from stories shared mouth to mouth. He listened more than he spoke, allowing concerns to surface naturally. Every village had its own rhythm and wounds shaped by neglect. Aaron carried each story with care, knowing unseen threads connected them all. In the northern plains, Aaron reached a farming settlement divided by a long-standing dispute over water flow. Old anger had hardened into habit, passed from one season to the next without resolution. He gathered both sides beneath an open sky and asked them to speak without interruption. At first, words came sharp and guarded, shaped by years of frustration. Aaron remained still, offering no judgment, only attention. Slowly, voices softened as understanding replaced blame. By dusk, an agreement formed not by command, but by shared need. The people expected Aaron to stay and oversee the outcome, yet he departed before sunrise. Balance required trust to stand on its own once guided. As he walked away, he felt the land respond with ease, as if relieved by restored flow. The armor reflected morning light, no longer drawing curiosity, only reassurance. Aaron understood that his presence was becoming a signal rather than a solution. That was how it was meant to be. Guardianship worked best when it encouraged strength in others. Far to the west, rumors reached Aaron of unrest along the trade routes. Merchants spoke of fear returning, not from attack, but from uncertainty left unresolved. Aaron followed the roads until he reached a crossroads long ignored by patrols. There he found travelers stranded by disagreement rather than danger. No one trusted the other enough to move forward together. Aaron stood among them and asked each to share what they feared losing. The answers revealed common ground buried beneath suspicion. By nightfall, fires burned again along the road, not as warning, but warmth. Travelers shared food and stories, watching over one another until dawn. Aaron remained on the edge, present but unobtrusive, allowing cooperation to take root naturally. When morning came, the group continued together without hesitation. Aaron stayed behind, watching dust rise and settle along the path. Balance had been restored not through force, but through clarity. That clarity was spreading faster than any decree. Back at the restored ruins, the meeting ground began to take shape. Elders, envoys, and learners arrived from distant regions, drawn by quiet promise rather than summons. Aaron guided discussions gently, ensuring no voice dominated the space. Knowledge shared freely replaced suspicion held tightly. The Queen visited often, observing rather than directing, allowing trust to grow without pressure. She saw strength emerge not from authority, but from shared responsibility. The space became living proof that balance could be nurtured. One afternoon, a messenger arrived bearing news from the southern borders. A rival realm was shifting resources, not openly hostile, yet unsettling in its movements. The Queen met with Aaron in the open hall, maps spread once more. This time, fear did not guide the discussion. Aaron suggested observation rather than reaction, understanding that imbalance often fed on haste. The Queen agreed, choosing patience backed by readiness. Together they prepared without provoking, protecting peace through restraint. Aaron traveled south, not with soldiers, but with listeners trained to observe patterns rather than provoke response. They moved quietly through towns and outposts, gathering understanding instead of rumors. Aaron taught them how to sense tension before it became threat. These lessons spread through action rather than instruction. People began resolving disputes before they escalated, guided by awareness rather than fear. The rival realms' movements slowed as resistance softened into stability. As the months turned, Aaron felt the weight of his role shift. He was no longer the sole bearer of balance, but a guide among many. This realization brought both relief and humility. The shield bearers had once failed by standing apart. This time, balance was shared, woven into daily life. Aaron encouraged others to step forward when needed, reminding them that guardianship belonged to all. His armor became symbol rather than necessity. One evening, Aaron returned to the city quietly, walking through streets alive with routine rather than tension. Children played without glancing toward the walls, merchants closed shops without fear of night. He stood at a distance from the palace, observing rather than entering. The queen found him there, joining him without ceremony. She spoke of changes she had seen within herself, of leadership reshaped by listening. Aaron nodded. Understanding growth often followed discomfort. They spoke of the future, not in terms of threat, but continuity. Aaron explained that balance would always require renewal, not permanence. The queen accepted this, prepared to lead with flexibility rather than control. She asked Aaron if he would remain. He answered that he would stay as long as needed, then step aside when others were ready. That promise carried no loss, only trust. Balance did not depend on one figure. As night settled, Aaron removed his helm and rested it beside him. The city lights reflected softly against the metal. He felt no urge to hide or stand apart. The armor had done its work, not by shielding him, but by reminding others of shared responsibility. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, subtle and unseen. Yet the land no longer trembled beneath them. Balance lived now in many hands. Aaron rose and walked back toward the meeting ground, where voices continued into the night. He listened from the edge, content to remain unseen. The work continued without him at the center, just as it should. Balance had matured beyond symbol and oath. It had become habit, practice, and choice. And in that quiet evolution, the realm grew stronger than it had ever been before. Time moved gently across the land, not marked by alarm or urgency, but by steady rhythm returning to daily life. Aaron remained present without standing at the center, allowing others to carry forward what balance had taught them. The meeting ground stayed active, its stones warmed by shared voices and patient listening. New faces arrived often, not seeking power, but understanding. Aaron watched from the edges, offering guidance only when silence asked for it. His role had shifted fully from bearer to keeper, and he accepted that with calm certainty. In the eastern lowlands, a harsh winter tested the strength of cooperation built over seasons. Supplies grew thin, and old instincts urged people to protect only their own. Aaron walked among them quietly, reminding through action rather than words. He helped rebuild storehouses, organized shared planning, and listened to fears spoken softly at night. Slowly, trust overcame scarcity. Villages opened their doors to one another, proving balance could survive hardship. When spring arrived, it found a land stronger than before. The queen continued to rule with restraint shaped by experience rather than caution. She no longer feared what stood beside her, for she understood leadership grew when shared wisely. Advisors adapted, learning to listen beyond their own certainty. Decisions took longer, but carried deeper roots. The throne no longer felt isolated from the land it served. Aaron noticed this change with quiet approval. Balance had reached even the highest seat without force or demand. One evening, a young guardian approached Aaron at the meeting ground, unsure but determined. The guardian spoke of wanting to protect without becoming rigid, to guide without commanding. Aaron listened patiently, seeing echoes of his own journey reflected back. He explained that balance lived in awareness, not control. The armor was never meant to separate, only to remind. The young guardian nodded, carrying that lesson forward without needing oath or ceremony. As seasons turned, the armor saw less use. Aaron wore it only when presence mattered more than words. Often, he traveled without it, blending into the rhythm of the land. People still recognized him, not by metal or symbol, but by calm he carried. This was the true success of his return. Balance no longer required display to exist. It lived quietly within shared choices and steady habits. A final challenge came not from borders or unrest, but from memory itself. Some elders feared that forgetting past conflict might weaken vigilance. Aaron gathered them beneath open sky and spoke of remembrance shaped by understanding rather than fear. He reminded them that balance did not erase history, it learned from it. The elders listened, finding peace in clarity. Memory became guide rather than burden. The land felt lighter for it. The queen invited Aaron to stand beside her one last time before the court. Not to announce change, but to acknowledge growth already achieved. She spoke of shared responsibility and quiet strength. Aaron remained silent, knowing his words were no longer needed there. The court understood without explanation. Balance had become visible through stability rather than spectacle. Applause did not follow, but respect settled deeply. When the gathering ended, Aaron left the palace without ceremony. He walked beyond the city walls as twilight softened the horizon. The meeting ground remained active behind him, voices rising in thoughtful exchange. He felt no loss in stepping away, only fulfillment. His purpose had never been to remain central. It had always been to restore alignment and then release it. At the edge of the valley, Aaron stopped and looked back once. Lights glowed steadily, untroubled by shadow. The land breathed evenly, held by many hands instead of one. He removed the armor and rested it carefully against stone. It would remain there, not as relic, but as reminder. Balance did not belong to objects or titles. It belonged to choice. Aaron continued forward into open land, unburdened and complete. The path ahead held uncertainty, as all paths did. Yet the realm behind him stood firm, guided by awareness rather than fear. His work was done not because balance was permanent, but because it had learned to renew itself. And in that quiet success, Aaron found peace. Aaron walked for many days beyond the valley, moving through open fields where the land stretched wide and unclaimed. The silence did not feel empty, but full of quiet purpose shaped by what had already been done. He no longer measured his steps by duty, only by awareness of the world around him. Birds rose and settled without fear as he passed. The air felt balanced, neither tense nor heavy. Aaron understood that true guardianship often ended not with praise, but with release. He reached a small river where traders once gathered before conflict made the crossing unsafe. Now the banks were clean, the water steady, and signs of shared use were visible in worn stones. Aaron paused and watched people cross freely, trusting the flow beneath them. None recognized him, and that felt right. Balance had become part of daily life rather than dependent on presence. Aaron smiled quietly, knowing the river needed no guardian now. As he continued, memories surfaced not as regret, but as understanding shaped by distance. He remembered the early years of wandering, when the armor felt heavy with purpose unshared. Back then, balance had been lonely work, misunderstood and often resisted. Now it lived beyond him, carried by many voices and choices. That change mattered more than any recognition. Aaron accepted that the strongest legacy was one that no longer required its maker. In a distant village, Aaron stayed briefly, offering help where it was welcomed. He repaired tools, listened to disputes, and shared meals without revealing his past. People responded with kindness shaped by habit rather than awe. Children played freely nearby, unaware of the quiet history that had shaped their safety. Aaron saw in their laughter proof that balance had taken root. He left before dawn, content to remain a passing presence. The road curved toward higher ground, where wind carried stories across open stone. Aaron rested there one evening, watching the sky change with slow patience. He thought of the queen, now ruling with steady clarity shaped by shared responsibility. He trusted her judgment without needing to witness it. Leadership had grown beyond dependence, and that was its strength. Aaron felt gratitude not tied to obligation, but mutual respect. Further on, Aaron encountered travelers seeking direction, uncertain but hopeful. He guided them towards safe paths and listening spaces rather than giving rigid instruction. His guidance focused on awareness of signs rather than control of outcomes. The travelers moved forward with confidence shaped by understanding. Aaron watched them disappear into the distance, knowing they would carry balance onward. That quiet spread mattered more than borders. As seasons shifted, Aaron felt his own rhythm change. He no longer woke with urgency or anticipation of threat. Instead, he observed the world with steady presence shaped by acceptance. Balance did not demand constant vigilance, only readiness shaped by calm. Aaron realized that guardianship had taught him to live as much as to protect. That lesson stayed with him wherever he went. One night, he returned briefly to the meeting ground, standing unseen among voices shaped by patience and respect. New guardians spoke with clarity, not repeating old mistakes. Aaron listened, then stepped away without announcement. His presence was no longer required there. Balance had matured into shared practice. The space thrived without him at the center. Far beyond familiar lands, Aaron reached open plains where no banners marked control. Here, people relied on mutual understanding rather than rule. Aaron felt at ease among them, sharing stories without weight of history. He understood that balance existed even where no one named it. That realization deepened his peace. Guardianship was universal, not bound to orders or symbols. Aaron chose to settle for a time near a quiet settlement where learning was valued. He taught awareness through example rather than lesson. People observed his patience and adopted it naturally. Conflict resolved itself before growing sharp. Aaron saw that balance could flourish anywhere attention was given space. This place needed no protector, only care. Years passed gently, marked by growth rather than struggle. Aaron aged without burden, shaped by fulfillment rather than duty alone. He carried the armor no longer, yet its meaning lived within him. Balance had become habit rather than role. Aaron felt no loss in that transformation. It was the intended end of every guardian path. News from distant lands arrived occasionally, carried by travelers speaking of steady realms and shared solutions. The Queen's name surfaced often, tied to wisdom rather than authority. Aaron listened without attachment, content to know balance endured. He had faith not in systems, but in people shaped by awareness. That faith felt earned. One morning, Aaron climbed a hill overlooking wide land shaped by cooperation rather than fear. He stood there as light spread evenly across fields and water. The world felt aligned, not perfect, but resilient. Aaron breathed deeply, aware of his place within it rather than above it. Balance surrounded him without demand. As the sun rose higher, Aaron felt a quiet completion settle within him. He had walked the path fully, from bearer to guide to witness. The cycle felt whole. He turned away from the hill and continued forward, not seeking destination. Balance traveled with him, naturally now. Aaron's story did not end in ceremony or memory carved in stone. It continued quietly through lives shaped by shared responsibility. His presence faded into the rhythm of the land without loss. Balance no longer required a name or symbol to endure. It lived in choice, awareness, and trust. And so Aaron walked on, neither legend nor ruler, but part of a world that had learned to stand evenly. The realm thrived not because he had returned, but because it had learned to listen. Balance had found its home everywhere.